This is Tom Fox, and welcome to a new season of Adventures in Compliance. This season, we're going to take up the stories from the collection entitled His Last Beau, some reminiscences of Sherlock Holmes, which is a 1917 collection of previously published Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle, including the titular short story, His Last Beau, the War Service of Sherlock Holmes. The collection's first edition adjusts the anthology subtitle to some later remembrances of Holmes. All of the editions contain a brief preface from Dr. Watson, which we will read in a little bit. The book itself, or the collection, was published by John Murray in October 1917 in the U.S. by George R. Doran the same year. The collection contains The Adventure of the Cardboard Box, which was included in the American first edition of the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, but dropped later. 6 of the stories were published in the Strand between 1608 and December 1913. His final story, His Last Beau, the War Service of Sherlock Holmes, is an epilogue about Holmes' war service and was first published in Collier's on September 22nd, 1917, one book before the book's premiere. There are some great stories in here, and I know you will enjoy them, and I hope you will enjoy this season of Adventures in Compliance really as much as I've enjoyed reading the stories. If you've enjoyed this series or enjoy Sherlock Holmes, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever great podcasts are listened to. Adventures in Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Today, we start with the adventure of the Wisteria Lodge. We're going to have a quick word from our network sponsor, Ethico, then we'll be right back.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting case closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, 2023, The Year in Compliance. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
And now, the adventure of the Wisteria Lodge. This began as a 2-part story in the Strand. Part 1 was the singular experience of Mr. John Scott Eccles, published in August of 1908, and Part 2 was The Tiger of San Pedro, published in September of 1908. We're going to combine it into one story as it was presented in The Last Beau, which of course is The Adventure of Wisteria Lodge. Holmes was in retirement, as Watson explained at the outset of the story, and that Holmes had, in March of 1892, Holmes received a telegram as they were at lunch. He scribbled a reply, made no remark, but the matter remained in his thoughts, for he stood in front of the fire afterwards with a thoughtful face. A gentleman named John Scott Eccles wished to discuss something that he had described as grotesque with Holmes, and he was invited to visit 221B Baker Street, but had barely arrived when the police showed up as well. Eccles had been implicated in a murder that had occurred the previous evening. One Aloysius Garcia had been beaten to death, and a note in his pocket suggested he would be meeting with Eccles that very night. Eccles had nothing to hide. He had spent the night at Garcia's house, Wisteria Lodge, which forms the name of the story, and he had been perplexed when he awoke in the morning to find the house deserted. Neither Garcia nor his house staff were around, and that included the servant who had interrupted an already awkward evening with what appeared to be a most ominous note. Inspector Bain had already had the note in his possession, and it seemed meaningless. Our own colors, green and white, green, open, white, shut. Main stair, first corridor, 7th right, green, baize, Godspeed, with the letter D. It was written by a woman. Bay suggested that a jealous husband might have been involved. Holmes, however, kept his own counsel. The murderer was a local person, he said, and was an Englishman. and he lived, or she lived, in a large house. The first enthralling part of the story ends with the arrival of the telegram and a gloating Holmes explanation. They travel to Esher, and discover that the constable that assigned to guard Wisteria Lodge, reeling from a sight of a particularly brutish man. It scared the constable so much that he really had to be handled with great care. Footprints, however, shown that someone had been there, and that touring the house, a number of other disquieting oddities were discovered. A dead and dismembered bird, a plate of burned bones, a bucket of blood, a mummified baby, all signs, Holmes declared, of voodoo. Inspector Burns moved to make an arrest. The awful face of the constable at the window that resolved itself into a perfect description of Garcia's cook, who is now in custody. Holmes did not for a moment consider the man guilty of the crime, but the arrest preoccupied Burns and allowed Holmes to continue his own investigation. He focused on High Gable, a home to a Mr. Henderson, whose staff include an English governess named Miss Burnett and a dark-skinned, patently foreign servant. Holmes was promptly rewarded when Henderson attempted to flee, taking a clearly unwilling Miss Burnett with him. She was rescued in the nick of time when Henderson's description reaches Baines. It becomes clear this is no simple case of murder. For it turns out that Henderson is one Don Juan Morillo, a former dictator of a South American country of San Pedro, and so cruel and violent that he was better known as the animal, the tiger of San Pedro. And it unspools a gripping tale of hot-blooded Latin politics spilling into the quiet green of England, and a worthy return to the game for Sherlock Holmes. In this story, I want to take a deep dive into some of the compliance lessons for the compliance professional from this story. I think there are multiple lessons, and I'd like to maybe explore some of these in a bit of a deeper dive. Number one, the importance of due diligence. The inspector and Sherlock Holmes uncover a complex web of criminal activity and high intrigue lurking beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary case. This underscores the importance of conducting thorough due diligence, even when presented with seemingly straightforward situations. For the compliance professional, you can think about this in your organization as enhancing your due diligence process by reviewing and strengthening due diligence procedures for third-party partners, suppliers, and other business relations. Implementing a more robust set of background checks and verifications to uncover potential red flags or hidden risks. And then continuously monitor for changes in the business environment as that may necessitate additional due diligence. Remember, the Department of Justice says when the business environment changes, your risks change. Number two, vigilance against foreign influence. The story involves a Spanish gentleman who becomes embroiled in a plot orchestrated by a foreign power. This serves as a cautionary tale about the risks of foreign influence and the need for organizations to be ever vigilant against potential threats and a wide variety of risks that can occur outside your home country. So how do you remain vigilant in this situation? Well, develop a comprehensive risk assessment framework to identify and mitigate the potential for foreign interference or influence within your organization. Establish clear procedures, policies, and procedures for reporting and addressing suspected cases of foreign influence or even espionage. Think of the Chinese and the Belt and Roads Project. And finally, provide regular training to employees on how to recognize and respond to foreign risk management threats. Number 3, recognize red flags. Throughout the investigation, Sherlock Holmes identifies various red flags such as unusual behaviors, inconsistencies in statements, and suspicious circumstances. Compliance professionals must be trained to recognize and respond appropriately when red flags appear in their organization. This is a critical, obviously, element of any compliance professional, and you need to encourage employees to be ever vigilant and proactive in identifying and reporting potential compliance issues or red flags. You need to implement robust whistleblower protections to ensure employees feel safe and empowered to come forward with concerns, and regularly communicate the importance of compliance and ethical behavior throughout your organization. Number 4, whistleblower protection. The Adventure of Wisteria Lodge highlights the courage of a whistleblower who comes forward with critical information, risking his own safety. Effective compliance programs should have a robust whistleblower policy and procedures in place to protect those who report suspected wrongdoing. Compliance professionals need to foster close working relationships between themselves, legal, security, and other relevant departments. Establish clear communication channel and protocol for sharing information and coordinating responses to compliance incidents. Conduct joint training and tabletop exercises to ensure a coordinated and effective response to compliance challenges. And number 5, coordinated response. The successful resolution of this case involves close collaboration between the inspector and Sherlock Holmes, demonstrating the importance of a coordinated compliance response across your organization and, if necessary, external law enforcement or regulatory authorities, and certainly those within your company. You need to continuously review and improve your compliance program as a compliance professional to regularly review and update compliance policies, procedures, and training materials to address evolving risks and regulatory requirements. You should analyze compliance data and incident reports to identify trends, vulnerabilities, and opportunities for improvement. And finally, benchmark your organization's compliance program against industry best practices and peer organizations. By applying, or rather, the Adventure of Wisteria Lodge underscores the complexity of compliance challenges and the need for diligence, vigilance, and a multifaceted approach to effectively mitigate risk and ensure legal and regulatory compliance. Compliance professionals can enhance the effectiveness of their organization's overall compliance programs and better protect against complex and evolving risks and foster a strong culture of compliance and ethical behavior going forward. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this first short story from the newest season in Adventures in Compliance, where we look at Sherlock Holmes, The Last Bow. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. I also hope that you will take the opportunity to review some of your favorite Sherlock Holmes stories. And if you'd like to talk about them or talk about the role of Holmes and compliance, I'd love to have a podcast with you. So reach out to me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. The award-winning Adventures in Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. I hope you will join us again next week, where we take up the adventure of the Bruce Hardington plans.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.